Hi everyone, this is Roger Capello bringing you My Week at the Club, episode number 46, installment 46, from Baltimore, Maryland, where I'm visiting my brother this weekend. Before I launch into my game of the week with Dave Couture, I'd like to say a few words about astronomy. Over on the right side there you see a cutaway view of the sun. And I know I talked about the core of the sun in one of my previous episodes, but there's an interesting factoid, I guess, that's out there that some of you may have run up against, which says that even though uh, regarding how long it takes light to get from the sun to the earth. So most people say, well, it's 8 minutes or, maybe 500 seconds, whatever, however precise you want to be, because it travels at the speed of light. It turns out that there's an alternate answer. Some people like to say, well, it takes from the light from when it's originally generated, the energy is generated in the core and the photons are generated. It takes a light perhaps 100,000 years to get to the Earth. And the thinking is that this light that is generated at in the very core of the sun here starts its path toward one of the edges, and instead of making it all the way out to the surface of the sun, it immediately runs into the plasma of the sun. The sun's a very hot core and has a very hot core, and the atoms are all ionized. The electrons are running around free. The nuclei of the atoms, which are largely hydrogen and helium, are running around free as well. And a plasma like that has the property that light just doesn't propagate at all well through it. Light or radio waves, which are another form of light. And the light immediately gets either scattered or absorbed by this plasma and sent off in a different direction. And what happens as this goes on multiple times, the photon starts out toward the surface, it gets redirected in a different direction after interaction with the electron, then another direction. It ends up being kind of a random walk, a drunken walk out toward the surface. And even though it's traveling at the speed of light, it takes it on the order of 100,000 years to get to the surface of the sun. And then it takes off unimpeded through the vacuum of space to the Earth, and only about 8 minutes later do we actually see it as light shining on us. That's the sort of the common interpretation, and that's largely true. But the one thing one inaccuracy in what they're saying that I wanted to pick, the nit that I wanted to pick, was that the photon that's generated there doesn't actually make it to the Earth. So the original photon is scattered around within the core of the sun, and then as it gets closer to the surface of the sun, it starts running into ionized atoms that are it's no longer just a pure plasma, but they're atoms that have of helium that have less than all of the electrons, only one electron instead of two, and sometimes it gets absorbed by that atom, because most of the helium atoms in the photosphere of the sun are in fact not, they're ionized, but they're not, most of them are not ionized, and the ones that are ionized are not fully ionized, so it's not a pure plasma. Anyhow, it's a different photon because it gets absorbed by the helium and then gets re-radiated, and so eventually we get light from the sun that originated at the center of the sun 100,000 years ago, but it's not exactly the same photon. Kind of an interesting story. Okay, so this week I played against Dave Couture, who is an interesting fellow among many other things, a chess chat that he does with George Marajanian, and a book that he's written. He's also the photographer for the club, and I went and looked at the website to see if I could find a picture of Dave to put up in the corner. I couldn't find any pictures of him. The same thing that happens with my wife, who takes all the family pictures. She seldom gets into pictures herself. But what I decided to put instead was Dave's excellent book, Progressive Tactics, 1002 Progressive Challenging Chess Tactics. that's available on Amazon, and they're a sequence of tactics that are fun to work through, particularly for people who are in the club, because they involve a lot of the positions that were arrived at between Dave and one of the other people in the club. So it's fun to play through it and see the names that you recognize. So a little plug for that. So the game itself, should have gone back to the beginning here. Okay, which you've been getting a peek at. Didn't mean to give you an advance notice. Was a Scandinavian. So I decided to play pawn to e4 to start out. And the reason for that was that the last time we played was in the club championship, and when I played Dave there, that was the only game out of the 7 that I lost in the club championship was to Dave, and that came with a d-pawn opening where he played a Dutch defense against me. So I wasn't ready to meet Dave's Dutch quite yet, so instead I decided to play an e-pawn opening, and he played this Scandinavian, which he played against me once before, and it's an interesting opening, but it can, if things go awry, they can go badly awry because Black's queen develops very quickly. White exchanges the pawns off and inviting the queen out into the center where it can get attacked by, I'm elite now at Best Buy, oh well, where it can get attacked by a knight. The queen retreats to sometimes to a5. Often it also goes to d8, or occasionally it even goes to d6 as a line within the Scandinavian. But this is the main line, the sort of the classical line that people tend to follow in the Scandinavian. And White goes ahead and continues opening up lines for his pieces to develop, and also staking his share of the center and discouraging Black from playing e5. Black in his turn develops. Normally in this position, White would play knight to f3. That's a good move, but of course it does allow this pin. And I didn't feel like allowing that. Sometimes that can get to be a little bit of an annoyance. And rather than go down that line, I decided to try something new, which was sort of an invention over the board. Black played c6 in response to that, which is a very characteristic move for Black in the, I don't know, without a mouse, how I'm going to draw arrows. Probably won't be drawing many arrows. Well, that went to the wrong place. I meant to go here to d8. That's gives the Black queen a route to get back if he has to, and also discourages White from moving to the d5 square, to using that square. So, sounds like my fans are worrying. Okay, so I then continue with knight to e2, and this was part of this idea behind playing bishop to c4. Now if the bishop were to come out to g4 to pin my knight, I can just chase it away with the pawn. Simple idea. Okay, instead he played on that other diagonal, the b1 h7 diagonal, which looks kind of like a reverse London or something. But it does have the drawback of going to a square where my knight can attack it right away. It's not immediately a problem because his queen is defending that square, but it can be a problem. He developed his knight, and I should point out in this position right here that my thinking was immediately well, this bishop is only defended by the queen, so it's potentially a tactical liability. All the other squares on the rank besides the one that the queen is on are defended or attacked by my pieces. They're all covered, and so if I could lure the queen somehow off of the 5th rank, I could win that bishop. The problem is there's no good way to immediately lure the queen off. So what I would like to be able to do would be something like, in this position, like to be able to do something like pawn to b4, and now the queen has nowhere to go, it would have to leave the 5th rank, and seemingly I would win the bishop, but the problem is, of course, is he takes the pawn. And I'm not attacking the bishop yet. Sorry, I'm getting this all out of order. Okay, this will be an important theme, but not quite in this position. Let's go rejoin the game here. I attack the bishop. His knight moves. And I threaten his queen. The idea now is if the queen were forced to move away, then he would lose the bishop. And doing it on the previous move wouldn't have worked because my knight wasn't attacking the bishop yet. Sorry. So Dave sees this and retreats his bishop. He gets it out of harm's way. But I don't want to give him time now to castle on the queen side, because if he gets a chance to castle, like if I were to castle here, then he could simply castle queenside, and now black's got a pretty good looking position. You know, his knight's going to move off the d file, and he's going to have going to be able to complete his development without much trouble. So I have to do something a little more energetic. So instead, what I played was knight to d5. Of course, he can't capture the knight with the queen because it's defended, and he doesn't really want to. The only square he has available over here is queen to a4, and he will quickly get into trouble after I start attacking him, say with the pawn, and then trade the knight off, and he's got no squares. So in this position, really the only decent move he has at this point is to retreat the queen all the way to d8, and then that keeps him from castling, so, which was sort of the idea behind this whole sequence. And then with the bishop on g6, I can attack it immediately with my knight, which is nice. But more to the point, if he wants to create an escape square, such as, you know, by playing h6, then my knight can just take the bishop. He would have to capture back with the f-pawn, and now he's horribly weakened his position. So instead he played e6, shutting down the activity along that diagonal. But this pawn to h4 now is a serious threat, because I'm threatening to, you know, advance Harry to h5, and either the bishop will have to move away, and where's it going to go? There are really no good squares. He could play it. Probably his best move would be to f5, but I could trade off my knight and injure his pawn structure and also open up the e file for an attack against his king in the center. And now he can't play pawn to h6, because I would do that move I was just looking at a moment ago. If he played pawn to h6, I could trade off that bishop, and that's really bad, because now that pawn on e6 goes lost immediately. Okay, so he played his knight into e4, which is a move I hadn't considered, and this opens up a bunch of tactical possibilities. There were really 3 moves I considered here. One was to push my pawn and attack his bishop. Another one is to trade off the knights. Another one is to play knight takes bishop. And I probably looked at knight takes bishop longest, but convinced myself that you know, after something like knight takes, I have to take the rook. He takes a rook. Basically, we're going to end up in a situation where neither one of us is getting a particularly large advantage. And so instead, after he played knight to e4, I decided to continue on just with the simple exchange of the knight, because I felt that it draws his bishop out into the center there where it's undefended. And now with queen to e2, I could attack that bishop, and it's, you know, he might have trouble finding a good defensive square. And first I retreated my bishop, so that in a sense I'm taking away this d5 square away from his bishop. because if he ever goes there, I'll be able to play my pawn to c4. Okay, tactical quiz here. Dave continued on with bishop to e7, which is a mistake because he didn't see this little trap that my last move set, and I won't show you what the answer is yet, but how does white go about winning a piece in this position? If you want to pause your video, now is a good time to do it. Okay, so what I would do is simply attack it again, either with a pawn or with a queen. I thought it was better to attack with the queen, and he can defend it easily enough, but I can attack it again with a pawn. Now, where can he go? If he comes to g6, I can push Harry here, and he's going to have to move again. If he goes to f5, I can push Gary, and he will again have to move it or trade it for some pawns. What he chose to do was to go to d5 with it, but I can push my c pawn in that case, and there's still no place for it to run away. So the bishop is trapped. That was the answer to the little quiz. So what he chose to do was to take the pawn. Oh, I see my note here. That's sort of interesting. I better spend a little time on that. After f3, I thought about this for a while because I was worried about the following sequence of him taking the d pawn with his queen, me capturing the pawn or the bishop with my pawn, and then him going ahead and taking the pawn with his knight. And now he's got two pawns for the piece, and his queen and knight are quite aggressively posted. He's threatening to take a third pawn here on b2. It's undefended. He could take that with his queen. And he's also threatening to come here. I won't draw an arrow because it would take me 3 hands with a touchpad. But threatening to come here with a knight, forking my queen and rook. Okay, so this is a sticky situation. Now, it turns out that Stockfish, if you look with the engine, says no problem, just go ahead and castle. I'll run that for you a bit. It's +3. It's very happy with that move. And the reason, after castles, is that if he goes ahead and does that fork of the queen and rook, I just go ahead and sack the exchange. I play my queen to a safe square, attacking his knight. It has to move. He takes my rook, and I take it back. And now he has a move. He has to go somewhere. So if he goes back to f6, for example, with his queen, then I can simply attack it with my bishop. And this position is 2.5 or so for white. So actually, it probably wasn't the best move sequence in this position. Okay, I take back the knight. He could play bishop c5. Okay, that's interesting. Huh. Bishop c5 supporting his queen, and then he could have an escape square for his queen on f2, maybe trading queens. But it's either way, it's not a good position for black. So instead, he didn't do that. He played his bishop to d5. I attacked it with the pawn. He took my f pawn, and I took it back with my queen. Stockfish wanted me to take with the pawn in this position, but I was unwilling to do that to my kingside pawns. And either way, he's going to get to take my d pawn with his queen. And this way, at least I felt, I don't know, like I had some more options for the future, castling either kingside or queenside. I can't castle kingside immediately because his queen is controlling this dark square diagonal. But I can do this. I can attack his queen with my bishop and make it go off somewhere. And at this point, he made a second big mistake in the game. And Dave wasn't happy with his play in the game. And he's a strong player. He's around 1800 now. And so these are kind of some uncharacteristic mistakes. But when he did this, I looked at it and I said, oh, geez, he's pinned my bishop. What am I going to do? And then I looked at it a little more and figured it out. So you could pause for a second and see if you can figure it out. Yeah, well, it was fairly easy. It came to me too. After not too much thought, simply take the bishop. It was not defended on b4. And even though his queen gets to, first check me, I can, if I were to interpose my queen now, this knight would go lost. It would be undefended on f4. But instead, I can just drop my knight back. The knight's a good defender. And then he takes the pawn on b2. This is still not a scary situation for white. I could castle. I think maybe that's what stockfish like best. What I chose to do was to attack his queen and defend my rook at the same time. He moved his queen to his only square he could go to. And then that gave me a move to play rook to d1, keeping him from castling on the queen side. I really didn't want to see that. I was much more happy about him castling king side because that's where my bishops are pointed, and I'm threatening in particular to trade off this knight on f6 and do real damage to his pawn structure if he should castle over there. So he didn't do that. Instead, he retreated his queen to defend that square. I attacked it a third time, and he's not going to be able to put a third defense on it. So we did, I guess, what's reasonable, and but it brings in a whole slew of new weaknesses, was to play it e5 and block the line of my bishop attacking that knight. So now I can't exchange a bishop for the knight as I was thinking about, but he's weakened this diagonal now for my light squared bishop pointing at f7, among other things. So I redeployed my knight. So, in this position right here, my knight's two favorite squares that it would come up through have been guarded by the e-pawn. So there's no sense leaving my knight on e2. And that's why I went to g3, where it can either go to the real strong square, f5, attacking his queen, or I can come to this blockading square in front of the e-pawn. He castled, probably gave a sigh of relief, but white's attack is just too strong at this point. I played my queen into f5. Again, not a stockfish favorite. Stockfish wanted me to go immediately with the knight attacking the queen, and then the queen has to move somewhere. Where is it going to move? Let's say he moves to c7 to keep an eye on f7. Then I could play simply, knight takes pawn, and if the king took back, end up winning a pawn, and also a short time later winning the king after, something like, which rook do I want to play? I don't know. Either one's going to get attacked, but, rook to d3 with the threat of playing the rook over to g3, checkmate. He can push his pawn up, but then I have queen takes mate, queen to g7 mate. I mean, they're just, black's position's too weak. White has too many attacking pieces. If you look at what's going on here, there's just every single piece of white's is either in the attack or about to take part in the attack. So knight f5 is strong. I liked my move, queen to f5, because I felt it was pretty forcing. It was forcing him to defend this e-pawn because I'm attacking a second time. Plus I'm threatening to set up some sort of mating combination along this light square diagonal. He defended the e-pawn. So I got my king out of harm's way. So on this square, I have to worry about a queen check at some point on c5, possibly leading to tactics. I took time out to play my king to h1. The only downside of that is now he's got potentially, at some point, tactics involving taking on the h4 square with the queen check. once this knight moves somewhere. Can't do it right away, but I have to keep an eye on it. Now, he made a move that really just helped me here, which was b5. And the reason this helps me is I can trade that pawn off, and now all of a sudden this light square diagonal is bearing down on f7. So things have really gotten critical here. I played, in order to turn up the volume, I played my knight to e4, attacking his knight a third time. There's no way to defend it a third time. And if he trades it off, which is what he did, then I can simply take it back with my queen. And now my queen is defending this weak pawn on h4. And my rook and bishop are both bearing down on f7. He has to defend that. He can't allow, his queen's too valuable to defend that square. He moves his rook over to defend it. That's fairly forced. The pawn couldn't move because it was pinned. And after he played that, I played bishop to b4, skewering the queen and the rook. It wins at least the exchange, and so Dave resigned at this point. Now, Stockfish, of course, didn't like this, and it actually, I looked at the move that Stockfish suggested here, but I didn't look too long because I felt that bishop b4 was quite strong, but I probably should have looked longer because this is just crushing. If I had played rook takes f7, this is a really tough position for black, because the queen's under attack. The white is threatening to move with a discovered check, and what can he do about it? He can't play queen takes rook. That's giving away the queen. If he plays rook takes rook here, we have queen takes rook check, and he has to block, and then I can come back. I could trade off the queens at that point, but even stronger would be to attack the rook a second time, and now there's no way to save this rook, because if he moves the king away, I win it immediately, and I'm threatening to play rook over to f1, getting a third attack. So I'm going to win a whole rook out right there. So it's just overwhelming material. So it was go back to the beginning here. It was a Scandinavian, which is a fun game, but gone a bit wrong. Whenever the queen gets caught out in the action in a Scandinavian, it's been my experience that it's not been a pleasant day for black. As long as white has to keep all of his minor pieces on. Even if this knight on gets traded on f3 by with a bishop pin, that makes black's job a lot easier. But as long as you keep all four of your minor pieces for white, then the queen is really at risk out in the center of the board. And so he ended up having to retreat it back to d8, and then I just got a little too much activity here with I have 4 developed pieces, and he's got 3 and is still a ways away from castling. And it's just, this edge in development was just a bit too much for black ever to get into the game properly. And a few mistakes, and the game was pretty much over. So, fun game. I'm sure Dave will be looking for revenge the next time we're out there, and he may very well get it. So this is Roger Capello for now, saying so long, and hope you enjoyed my week at the club. Bye.